Hello everybody and welcome to today's IEP Live Learn Lunch, our slightly delayed Star Wars special. We're really excited to be joined today by Kev and Gerry, who are going to be taking us through, well, I don't want to spoil the surprise. I think I'm just going to hand over to you and say, you know, over to you guys.
Fantastic. Thanks, Helen. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Before we get stuck into it, I'm conscious there's a lot of people on my screen right now. And if you're in the same view as me, you might see me and Gerry as these two little blips on screen. If that's the case, there's a view button up the top of your screen. If you click there and choose speaker view, you'll just see whoever's talking. And that might be a better viewing experience for you. So welcome to the session. As Helen says, a different one today. Usually we come into these live learn lunches armed with PowerPoint and away we go into presentation mode. But the whole idea of this, originally done on Star Wars Day, was about the good and the dark side of the Force. An opportunity to explore the world of offending and how it relates to subsequent employment. So what I'm going to do in a minute is I'm going to get Gerry to introduce himself. And then for the next 20-30 minutes, I'm going to fire some questions at Gerry, and Gerry's going to give us some very honest answers about his life and his thoughts. Once we shut up, we're going to open it up to an extended Q&A, and Pete's going to join us then as well. So you're going to have an ex-copper, an ex-prison officer, and an ex-offender all in the room. And I know I speak for Gerry when I say when we get to that section, there is no question you can ask him that he'll take offence at. So please do use this event as an opportunity to talk to someone who's offended, who's gone to prison and rebuilt his life afterwards. So let's get stuck into it. Gerry Keogh, can I ask you to say hello to the group? Tell us a bit about yourself, will you, Gerry? Where you come from, how old are you now, what's your family set up, what you're doing at the moment?
So thanks very much, Kevin, and thank you everybody just for giving me this opportunity. And I'd just like to apologise for not being in attendance in the first one. I am not going to labour on that, but it was just a complete mistake on timings. So my name's Gerry, originally from Glasgow, and I live in Birmingham. I don't want to go too much into it, but I had no criminal activity within my youth or my life previously, or to anything at all like that. Quite a stable life, quite a middle class life, I would say. I was a Royal Mail senior manager during the time when I was arrested about 12 years ago. My conviction, was theft of credit cards. I stole a lot of credit cards, spent a lot of money, and I received an 18-month prison term from that. So previous to that, there was nothing else really within me touching the criminal justice system or anything at all like that. And subsequent to that, I'll get out of prison, rebuilt my life, went back to Glasgow for a bit and started a social enterprise called Unemployed. When I got out of prison, I'd done a few jobs like McDonald's, KFC, but then ended up in employability. Ended up back in senior management, worked in Northern Ireland, built my life back in Birmingham. And then I went back and started my social enterprise, reaching out to the hardest to reach, including ex-offenders, homeless people, people with addictions, and the long-term unemployed, to support people back to work in Glasgow. I'm now actually back in Birmingham and made some personal choices. I got my young son in Birmingham and my two other children, so I decided to come back to Birmingham. And actually, I now work in schools, which might surprise a lot of people considering my background. But yeah, I now work in schools. I work within the careers of school, and I support careers within schools. So I'm supporting young people in schools and going back to basics, and I'm reaching out to schools and supporting schools to support their young people to make positive choices when leaving school. And I do a lot of work with ex-offenders in Birmingham as well, actually, to support ex-offenders. I work with a couple of organisations in Birmingham, one being the New Leaf Network, and I'm part of that organisation. where we do peer mentoring and support mentoring, offer advice and guidance to people from across the UK. To be honest with you, we use that sort of setup. So I'm kind of keeping dipping in and out, but my whole life hasn't been revolved around supporting ex-offenders since I get out. It's been like getting my life back together, finding employability, which is when I met the brilliant Kevin, and then made certain decisions a couple of years ago to kind of take that a stage further and to start support people that had made some wrong decisions in life, whether it be criminal justice or whether it be anything at all like that, in order to get to where we are. So that's kind of where we are at the moment.
Brilliant, thanks, Gerry. And you mentioned you got an 18-month prison sentence.
Yes.
How long did you serve?
So I served actually probably the full 9 months, which sounds quite bloody ridiculous. Sorry, when you say it like that. But I actually did get out and tag, and then just had a complete breakdown when I get out. I was drinking, couldn't deal with. I'd lost everything to a point. I hadn't lost my family, but I'd lost my career, lost my partner. And I was in my mid-30s at that point, and you kind of thought, you know, so somebody that hadn't been in that criminal justice system kind of go through. I was going to probation in Birmingham at the time, and I started drinking, because I just couldn't deal with what had happened to me. I couldn't deal with the whole collapse. So I was recalled back to prison because I broke my curfew. So, which was probably the best thing that ever happened, because you meet so many prisoners that when they walk through the gate, that terminology is that I'm never coming back here. And obviously me being a first offender, you know, that was definitely me. I'm never coming back to this. And literally within about 4 weeks, I found myself back in prison. Obviously on the same sentence, and it was a recall as opposed to an additional offence. But that was probably the biggest slap in the face for me to wake up, to kind of go, you're in your 30s now, you know, you can either go one way with this, you know, you can either get out, don't rebuild yourself, or you have to get yourself together. I had quite a lot of options in prison, if I'm honest with you, when I went into prison, where I met lots of people within the criminal fraternity to go and do other things within the criminal world. Obviously, I didn't take those options, and I moved back to Glasgow actually after I get out to rebuild my life.
There's two big things I want to take from what you just said there, Gerry. First of all, I think it's really important that you've helped people see the collateral impact of a prison sentence.
Yeah.
I think we can lazily think of prison as being, you lose your liberty and you receive a punishment. Mm-hmm. But I think what you're saying about how life collapsed on release, relationships, etc.,
a
really important point to note. Second thing I really want to take from that is where you ended there, because I remember when I was a young police officer, I had one lad who I arrested. He went to 6 months in prison for burglary. Mm-hmm. And I saw him after he was released, and I said, how did it go? And he said, I went in an apprentice and I came out a master. Yeah, I learned so much about how to offend better while I was in there.
Yes.
So can you just give us some kind of insight into what was a typical day like in prison? What prison were you in first?
So I was remanded to which was then HMP Blakenhurst, which is now HMP Gould, and it was dirty. It's one word that I can use. The violence was horrendous. The violence was just absolutely appalling. It was kind of, I don't want to use the term that was in the middle of gang fights, but there was a lot of, you know, within Birmingham itself, still goes on, I suppose. There was lots of things. So I kind of faced that from day one, from when I walked in to prison. I think being surrounded by, because most people that I met in violence actually were, I don't want to use the term good guys, but I met a lot of good people in prison, But I met a lot of people that just literally their life was a revolving door within prison, the officers, and I always called up prison officers. It was just such an eye opener for me. I think the drug abuse that was going on in prison, even, you know, it's still obviously there. I couldn't get my head around the drug abuse that was actually going on. That included from the pharmacy, just people that were taking heroin substitute, I suppose at the time, to the actual then obviously the drug culture that was going on within prison as well. And the amount of people that were getting caught up within that drug culture that I met going through my term, even when I went to open prison, I was then sent to Lay Hill once I was sentenced, which was it was brilliant. Not brilliant, but compared to where I was into open conditions. But the biggest thing again then in open conditions was it brings its own problems. You've got guys that are coming to the end of their sentences, or people that are doing short time sentences. And again, the violence wasn't as much, because once you're in an open prison, if you commit any sort of violence, then you're sent straight back to lock-up conditions. So there is that kind of, but what I did notice again within the open condition was the bullying that potentially they've been on. I was lucky, I never get bullied, and I was never involved in anything like that. But that then led to the amount of offenders that turn to drugs, again, through boredom or through relationship breakup, the mental health breakdowns that I saw within it. And because people would they were kind of drawn to me a little bit as well. One, because I can articulate myself probably a little bit better, and I don't sound like I'm from a housing estate, although originally I was, I just happened to have a working life. So because I could talk, I could read and I could write, I had people that were kind of drawn more to me more for advice and guidance, which was really weird because it was never part of my life previous to getting into prison. But then all of a sudden I had proper, I would use the term gangsters, and proper roadmen that were just literally coming with court papers and wanting me to read them, or wanting me to read letters or write letters. And once people you build a bit of a trust within prison as well, with a certain hierarchy within there. Once they trust you, you would write letters home, I did have a couple of guys that would come to my cell, and I would write personal letters to their wife and their partner and their children, or they would get me to read letters. So all of that was, there was a kind of balance that you were trying to deal with. You were trying to deal with your own emotions of being locked up and being away from the children, my family, my relationship was breaking down. To then trying to be that, I wasn't ever a support mechanism or a support person within it, but I did tend to, that's what I was drawn to, but then I also found that also supported me once I was inside as well, because there's certain levels of prisoners when you're inside. I found, there was definitely a level of where people sat. I was kind of drawn to that top level because I remember being inside. I remember having a conversation with somebody once, and they went, "Listen, the reason we like you, Gerry," and it was, I couldn't believe it. He says, "Is you're not an offender. You're not a criminal. You committed one offence, or you were caught once, and So he said, I like you." And he was talking on a personal term. He says, "Whereas I don't give the time of day to a lot of people that are in here, because it is strange when you're, so that whole life is turned upside down." And I'm trying to stay afloat. I always say that. I always try and stay afloat, Day-to-day life, I kind of learned very quickly, keep yourself clean. I went for a shower every morning, made sure I was going for a shower every morning. And you kind of learn, because people pick on people. So the guys that weren't going for showers, or the guys that weren't coming out of their cells, they were easy prey, unfortunately. And they would get picked off quite quickly. So once you kind of realise how it kind of works within that level within prison, at the bottom level, you kind of realise that you don't fall within into that trap of, I went to education, I didn't go to work. I became a mentor within 2 of the prisons I was in. It wasn't anything massive, but it was just that it gave me a reason to get up every morning to go and do something. And then it was, so it was just a basic try to survive that the wild world of violence, drugs, and the good people you meet. You met a lot of good officers inside. Actually, when I was transferred to Oak prison, one of the officers actually came up to me and said, I'm sorry to see you leave. And this is an officer that I didn't have much interaction with. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He says, well, you don't cause trouble. He says, you're an ideal prisoner on the wing, you know. He says, we're losing a good prisoner. He says, and we know that you support some of the officers. So there was kind of stuff like that you kind of take away a little bit, where it because when you're inside, your morale and you're on rock bottom. So you do take away those positives, and it was great to hear that from an officer that said that, because that gave me, made me feel a little bit better about myself. So, because when you're, yeah, sorry.
So let's switch focus now, Gerry. You had that time in prison. You just very vividly described what it was like. You said upon release, your life fell apart.
Yeah.
What did you do to rebuild your life?
It's kind of weird, because I kind of, when I left school when I was 16, I left school on a Friday and I joined Royal Mail on a Monday, literally. So I went straight from school, straight to work. And I was in my 30s and found myself in prison. But during that whole time span, I was working. So I made a decision to go back to Glasgow, move back in with my mum, as you do, try to build it. And I started job hunting, started looking for jobs. And I made the same mistake as what everybody does, potentially, that I've met through my journey in employability, is that people think they can go back in the same job, same background, same whatever that they've done for the last 15, 20 years, because that's all they know. And mine was Royal Mail, and mine was mail distribution and things like that. And I can apply for a couple of jobs, obviously, out with Royal Mail. I was not going to get anywhere near with DPD, a few other jobs, career jobs, things like that. And because obviously I had to declare my conviction, I realised that. So then I thought, right, so what am I going to do? So then it came a choice, but I just decided that I wanted a job. I just wanted anything. Just a very quick story. I applied for McDonald's, and I went for the job interview, and I happened to get an interview by a store manager. And during the interview, he's looking at me, he's like 35 at this point, 36. And everybody else is like 18, 19. And he's like, why do you want this job? Why are you here? He says, you're too good for this kind of thing, And I just said, okay, I'll be straight with you. I said, I walked out of prison 3 months ago in Birmingham. I'm back in Glasgow, building my life. Told him a little story about what I did. And he went, okay, you start Monday. And that was it. And it was kind of, we didn't speak about it again after that. And then the Monday morning I turned up and I was frying burgers. I was earning money. And then from then I built my life back. And then within about 8 months, I was on the management training at McDonald's. Within a year, I was running a shift. And it all came down to having that one conversation and declaring it in an open and honest way. Probably not the best way to do it, but it kind of worked for me at the time. Because the person that was making the decision was the store manager. He made that decision. Had I probably got the assistant manager or maybe a shift runner at the time, I probably wouldn't have got the same response. But he kind of looked at me and went, okay, I'm going to take a chance on you. And that's exactly what he said. I'll give you a chance. And that was it. And it's kind of what I've taken as I've moved forward through my life over the last 12, 13 years is, okay, let's give somebody a chance. And if we can give somebody a chance, how will that affect? And I've seen that hundreds, if not potentially thousands of times, just that one person giving one person a chance.
Yeah. And you mentioned before the McDonald's interview, you'd been job searching.
Yeah.
How did those other employers react when you did disclose your conviction?
I think even like obviously back then when you leave prison, when you speak to probation, the biggest thing you're always told is about disclosure. You have to disclose, and you have to do this, and you have to do that. You have to do. Well, you do and you don't. And obviously back then I disclosed straight away. And it was a kind of learning process that I went through. It's like, and I use it even today, and I used it with unemployment, and I used it when I was working in employability. It's all about when and how you disclose. And of course you disclose. But then obviously I then learned to understand the rehabilitation of offenders. I learned to understand, I worked out when my conviction was going to be spent. So I was always giving myself goals to work towards. So I knew that when my conviction was spent, that I didn't need to declare it on certain opportunities or certain jobs that I went. Now, this was about 6 months after I left prison that I'd started working this out, because nobody's there to tell you, probation, there is lots of great organisations now, like I said, that are probably more aware of the employability and support people like that. I was kind of self-taught that way. I taught myself to understand that. And then I kind of went from strength to strength to strength. And I'm always that big believer that once you're in a job, it's easier to get another job or to get a better job or to get a promotion, as opposed to I'm going from here and I want to go back into it. That doesn't work, whether you're an ex-offender or you're long-term unemployed or whatever. So I made conscious decisions to kind of start again and rebuild and to gain, I hate to say it, but the reality is you gain trust within your employers. That's what it is. And then as soon as I became, within a year, I was on like the management level at McDonald's. I then moved back to Birmingham and moved to KFC. We're down to that, and I had the exact same scenario there because they gave me a chance straight away because I'd already been a manager within McDonald's. My conviction wasn't spent, obviously. I had to declare it. But again, because McDonald's had clearly gave me that chance, and KFC at the time in Birmingham were going through an expansion and they needed experienced managers, and I had plenty of that. I was lucky and I was very fortunate that I managed to get that. And then within a year after that, I fell into employability, which completely changed my life.
Yeah. Well, of course, you met me.
Obviously.
3 more questions for you.
Yep.
The first 2 are very similar to each other. A number of people on the webinar today advise unemployed people on how to get a job. And some of those unemployed people are ex-offenders.
Yes.
Top 3 tips for advisors on how they can support an ex-offender job seeker in how to disclose.
Okay, actually, that's a good question. It's a really good question. So I took the supporting ex-offenders. I'm an ex-offender, supporting myself and everybody else. And when I speak to advisors, whether it be from the job centres or from employability programmes or anybody I work with, I always say to them, do not treat an ex-offender any different from anybody else. The only difference is they have a barrier to employment. If you've got one arm, you've got a barrier to employment. If you're long-term unemployed, you've got a barrier to employment. If you've got a mental health problem, you've got a barrier to employment. Everybody that sits in front of you, probably about 90% of them have a barrier to employment. An ex-offender just has a barrier to employment. If you can get your head round, how do you deal with that barrier? Now, sometimes I use the analogy of you draw a circle, you cut a pie out of it, and you say that slice of the pie, depending on what it is jobs that you can't apply for because of your barrier, right? And if you can have those kind of open and honest conversations with somebody, then you can say, so let's forget about those jobs. You've now got this part of the pie. Let's look at all the jobs that we can populate here. And then all of a sudden, what you're doing then is you're not constantly dealing with a negative of, I can't apply for this, or I can't do that, or I can't do that. All of a sudden, you've flipped it on its head and you're going, right, we know you can't do this. And I use the analogy again, if you've got one arm, which probably changes now, but you can't drive a bus at the moment, right? So you're not going to do that. You don't want to do that job. So I use the same analogy again with regards to ex-offenders and say, right, you have to have a bit of an open conversation to say, okay, what was your offence, without getting into detail. What is the barrier? Is there potential, theft, or is it a sexual offence, or is it whatever? Right, let's deal with that. So you can't apply for these jobs within these sectors. Here's all the other jobs. And what are you going to have to do potentially? Retrain? Or what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to use your skill set in order to do a decent application to apply for a job in the background. So it's not about treating an ex-offender as a special case, and I do not do that. And even ex-offenders get annoyed with me because I don't treat people specially like that. I treat them as just unemployed. That's the big thing. But we have to, obviously, if you were dealing with somebody with mental health, or somebody that couldn't speak English and they had an ESOL, or they had a right to work and they didn't have all the documentation, they're all barriers to employment, and you try and support them to get to that point, to the interview. And it's the exact same with an ex-offender. We have to be having those kind of open, not open conversations about what crime you committed, but open conversations to say, these are potentially not the job that you can apply for right now, but what we need to do is get you into a job so that when you can apply for it, you know, when your conviction's clear or whatever, then you can apply for it. And see, when you can apply for it, then you've already got a body of work behind you that supports you to get to where you want to be. So it's a bit like being a bit of a careers advisor as well as being an employability specialist. But then again, if you speak to any good employability person, that's exactly what they do. That's exactly what they feel their job is.
Okay, so similar question, top tips, but this time I'm aware that some people from an HR background are with us.
Yes.
So what top tips could you give HR departments about how to encourage applicants to disclose?
Right. Brilliant question. And I think one is, don't be scared within HR to, and I'll use this word, educate yourself a little bit. Don't take the statutory guidelines that are just issued. Go and, you know, if you really want to do your job, and there's organisations that are really, really good organisations out there, like Unlock in England, like Marie Claire's New Leaf Network in Birmingham, is that you can go and speak to organisations that work with ex-offenders. Now, the biggest thing is lived experience, you know, and I succeeded well above everything because I used my lived experience to support people, because I knew not their journeys, but I knew the barriers and everything else with them. But then when I started to work with other organisations, when I was in Glasgow with Unlock Employment, that I realised that I didn't know everything. And it was really, especially working with like addictions or homeless problems like that. So I reached out to those organisations to say, look, I would like to support people. What's the best thing in order for me to do it? And it's the exact same for people that are working with ex-offenders. It is to go and speak to organisations that are out there. Do a bit of local knowledge, a local digging, or even go to the national organisations. Especially go and look at organisations that promote lived experience within their organisation, because then you know that you're going to get the best advice. And it's just about taking that step to go and ask those questions. But I would definitely say with HR is that I think within today's job market, within, you know, especially with what's going on within the UK, is that we know there was a massive move for the government to support organisations to hire people with convictions. I will be honest with you, when I went back to Scotland, they were already doing it. And I was lucky that my MP at the time, who was Yusuf, absolutely, he was my local MP. So when he found out about me, he backed me to the hilt. And it's kind of drawn that balance. It's kind of getting that. It's great to see that England, obviously, you know, they have been taking steps, but it's how do you transition that into HR, into doing risk assessments, or, you know, taking that chance, and, you know, and just being able to. The biggest thing is just a little bit of education. Don't just go with the government guidelines. Just don't go with it the straight and narrow with it. If you want to have a diverse workforce, that that wants to grow your business, that you want sustainability with regards to your job, with your clients that are joining, and you want sustainability. You know, we do lots of work within companies around mental health, understanding and supporting mental health, to support for people that are working within it. And I'm not saying that we set up the same sort of organisations to support ex-offenders, but all you need to do is just it's just that little bit of education. And the other little bit that I always say to people is that the biggest thing about helping people with convictions back into work is that there's thousands out there that do it already. And what I mean by that is there's already thousands within your organisations right now that have convictions. They may not have disclosed, or it may be a spent conviction. And it's about understanding that. It's about understanding. I'm not talking about the people that don't disclose and they don't, but it's I suppose it's just about breaking that barrier, that little bit.
All right, look, there's one more thing I want you to tell the audience about, and then we're going to go to Q&A. Can you tell the audience about the letter you received that you weren't expecting?
The one for the Queen?
Yeah.
The Prime Minister, yeah. So, so when I went back to Glasgow, I'd set up an organisation called Unlock Employment again. It's not running anymore. I decided to close it down. But during that time, my passion for Unlock Employment was really, I believed I could do it better and supporting people back into work, and it wasn't just my lived experience. But however, during obviously then COVID came a couple of years ago and during lockdown, and most organisations that were supporting people back into work shut down. I made a decision not to shut down. I made a decision to then go into my local community and support the food banks, support the children's organisation called Govan Youth Information Project. And we went then on the streets and started doing food distribution. What I found when we were doing the food distribution for the kids and the parents and through the Salvation Army is that most of my clientele base were all using these services because we were doing that. So what I did do, I set up what I call community-based, street-based employability. I managed to tap into funding streams. I managed to set up a digital lending library. I managed to set up the connectivity devices because people didn't have Wi-Fi digital within their homes. And what I did do is I kept the employability rolling one way or another. I was working 7 days a week, after work and stuff like that. And then unbeknown to me, I was one of my local another MP, Stevens, and a couple of other people locally had nominated me for a British Empire medal, and I was awarded that. I kind of laugh when I say it. I kind of say it, but yeah. So yeah, I was awarded a British Empire medal last year. It's something I'm very proud of. Something my family's very proud of. And it's just another it's just a great thing to happen, if I'm honest.
Yeah, something you thoroughly deserved. And what really took me with when you were awarded that is I know a number of people who are award winners who have got OBEs, CBEs, and almost entirely you find out that they receive those awards because a friend nominated them and maybe was encouraged to nominate them.
Yeah.
For you to receive that, and for the first you knew of it to be when the letter from the Prime Minister arrived.
Yeah. That was. I mean, it was weird. It was just one of those crazy things that nobody believed. Nobody. I actually came to Birmingham. I was down in Birmingham that weekend actually because I came down to see my son, and I told him I got a letter from the Prime Minister because it actually came from Boris Johnson. And again, nobody believed me. It was just, and I wasn't allowed to tell anybody as well. That was the thing. I could only tell literally my ex-wife and my partner at the time and stuff like that. But yeah, so it was. But it was one of those fantastic things that you don't think would ever happen. But yeah, it was nice. It was nice. It was nice to receive.
What a journey, mate. What a journey from offending to British Empire medal. Gerry, thank you very much for your contribution. We're going to open it up to questions now. And Helen, it might be an idea if we start with any that are already in chat. Bear in mind, ask Gerry anything you want. You cannot offend him. And we've also got Pete on hand here as the ex-prison officer, if you want to ask anything from the other side of the prison fence. I'll shut up now.
Okay.
Oh, please don't. Right, so Neil has said a fantastic and well-deserved award. Thank you for sharing your story, Gerry. So I'll share that first. And Abby has said congratulations on your award. And I echo that as well. Quick question before I read the questions that are coming out. When you first opened the letter, did you think, wow, this is for real? Or I would have suspected that a member of my family was playing a joke on me. It would have crossed my mind that I was being wound up.
It was just, I thought it was just a surreal moment that I had to sit down and read it like 3 times, you know,
wonderful.
Because then what you had to do, then you had to then phone the Honours Office, which was part of the royal side of it, and then when I spoke to somebody, they kind of said yes, it's true, but don't tell anybody. And I think that's kind of And then I did actually tell my brothers, and they didn't believe it.
Oh, bless.
they because they just think my story's just crazy anyway, you know.
Oh.
Because I was kind of like, yeah, I was the not the good boy, but I was the older brother that should never have done what he done, but then managed to build it all back, and then this was the next bit, and it was like, oh my god, you know.
Oh, it's wonderful. I could spend the rest of the afternoon talking to you about that, but I will grab you another time because I can. So Tony has said, I've supported stroke placed people into work successfully, but then have encountered difficulties stemming from the person's colleagues who find out about offences through their own research on Google. Any advice? And this is the problem, isn't it? I was talking to someone the other day about the fact in the Google era, there's no such thing really, is there, in a lot of cases of things?
No, and I've had a few instances of that where I've supported people into work and people have then found out more. I suppose it's a difficult one. One, I would always depending what the offence is. I think I've dealt with people with sexual offending history that was sexually related, and they're slightly different when you're dealing with somebody that's potentially of a violence nature. And what I mean by that is that people look at convictions differently whenever they find out. You know, you wouldn't believe people celebrate sometimes that they've got convictions and they don't mind talking about it, and they talk about it as the past. So lots of people deal with it different ways. I would definitely say that if it's happened to somebody before, then it's all about, you know, where are we looking to support people to move into work? Is it connected in any ways to the local area? That's what I always find the biggest problem is that if you're working within a local area, then the chances of your conviction being revealed, even if it's a historical one, there's more chance of that, because that is how it works. You know, word of mouth, people know people in the Facebook era and things like that as well. So I'd also say as well that you'd be surprised how many people actually get found out is because they tell somebody within work. They build, you know, you're getting into work and you want to trust people, and you disclose something to somebody and you don't disclose it all. So again, I'm a big believer in educating ex-offenders as well who are going into work, because sometimes the biggest problem I've got, and I've had to tell people, is stop talking about your conviction. Stop it. You know, we're not talking about the past, we're looking to the future. I'm in a bit of a privileged position where I can have those conversations with people, because then I can give them the advice afterwards rather than just say, don't talk about it. But yeah, it's a difficult one. But that is definitely one of the things is have those conversations, speak to people that, you know, potentially is there a possibility, no matter what, is it that people will find out because you're working within a local area as opposed to maybe traveling out to the next city or wherever that's. And they're all part of the barriers to employment that I always look at. And that then is potentially another barrier to employment that you have to have conversations with.
Okay, so it's about thinking about that bigger picture then, and whether what the likely impact is around the chance that it will be uncovered. Okay, interesting, thank you. There's also a question: should more be done in prisons to encourage education on release, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think 100% there should be. I think it's a subject that I kind of get involved with over the years. There's lots of great work, you know, and I know we always talk about the Timpsons and we talk about the other ones, but you know, they've worked in fantastic models, you know, and I'm working, like again, New Leaf, we're talking about potentially working in getting apprenticeships, you know, getting young offenders to start doing apprenticeships, because then once you start doing apprenticeships, there's your pathway back to stop reoffending, potentially. And if that's done on the inside, even as a starter, then it gives that person, that young woman, and I'm using the term young at the moment, as I'm thinking about YOs, it gives them that reason not to go back into criminality when they get back out. Education is massive as well. You know, but my own personal opinion is that employability stops reoffending. You know, not every reoffending, but it cuts. It's statistically proven. You support somebody into work, and if you're supporting them from the earliest opportunity during that life cycle of crime, or criminality of the prison, then you've got a better chance of them not going on to commit more crime. So, yeah.
It's that focus, isn't it? It's focus on what what someone's focusing on and achieving. It's keeping their focus.
The biggest thing I always, whenever I speak to people during my time, during my organisations, during speaking to ex-officers and speaking to probation, is listen, you speak to 9 out of 10 people that walk through prison and ask them, do you want a job? And they'll say yes to you. And the thing that stops them getting a job is life, unfortunately. You know, life, that could be family, everything. People, there's not many people that leave prison that don't say, I don't want to change. And again, when I set up Unlock, I was a privileged position again there where I could support people and identify and say, look, you're not ready right now for a job. You need to go and sort this, or you need to go and take some advice, or here's an organisation that could help you. However, keep coming back to me. Keep coming back to me, because I don't want to lose I don't want to lose that support mechanism that will drop. But it's what happens now is not, yeah, and I will say even now is people just go, sorry, you're not ready to work. You've got a conviction, or you've got an addiction, or you've got this, or you've got no fixed abode. I would never say no to anybody that walks through my door. People did need help, people did need support, people did need further guidance, and I couldn't give it all. But then I would support them to peer mentor, or I would support them to whatever. But the biggest thing that I always did was keep coming back to me.
And it's that belief, isn't it? Having someone that believes in you is massively impactful, isn't it? Having someone who says, yes, I believe you can. Yeah. Even if that's all that you're saying is, I believe you can, let's look for a way.
I believe you can, and it's not for me to judge just to fall back over. I always looked at my job as I was helping people in it work, you know. And that happens in life, out with them. Criminality, people fall over, mental health, just anything, you know, lots of stuff, addiction, you know, the amount of young people now that are caught up, you know, with the cocaine habits, the cocaine epidemic that's through the UK at the moment, that are falling over from mental health, falling over, losing jobs, and I see it all the time, and I met lots of young people like that. So there's other people that face all those kind of barriers as well, that they've not fallen into the criminal justice system yet.
I think that point about someone believing in you, it might be pertinent to turn to the question in chat about prison officers. Is it the case that some want to see rehabilitation, for some prison is punishment? And it might be interesting to get both Gerry's and Pete's views on that one, if you don't mind. Gerry first.
Yeah, I think especially even after I came out, again, I can only use Glasgow at the moment, but I did work with a couple of organisations that had worked in recovery cafes in Glasgow, and they were bringing me in to speak about employability, and I was blown away actually by the empathetic prison officers that I met during that time. They were absolutely phenomenal, blew me away, absolutely blew me away, and it kind of took me back to my own time when I was inside, where I didn't quite think like that because I was just trying to get through prison. But obviously, I've got positive stories about prison officers, and I've never not shared them because I think it's important to talk about the positive side. And that's where I've always tried to work on, is accentuate the positives. And yeah, the prison officers are changing. I believe that they deserve a massive pay rise. I think what we pay with prison officers is ridiculous for the job that they do. I don't believe that the culture of rehabilitation is completely built into that, but we're not paying them enough to do that. We're keeping them, it's a warehouse storage facility that most officers, unfortunately, are working in. But there is a lot of officers out there, there's a lot of good guys, there's a lot of good women that are working within prisons that see the benefit of rehabilitation.
Pete, your views?
Oh, he's on mute. Let's unmute him.
I think he's frozen.
There we go.
There we go. I agree completely with what Gerry said. There are some amazing people that I've worked with. I did 15 years, and some genuinely really, really good people who have rehabilitation at the heart of everything that they do. But and much what like Gerry said about prison life from substance misuse and all the other stuff he touched on, prison the prison service mirrors society, and there are good people and there are also others that are just there to get paid and go home at night and couldn't care less, for want of a better phrase. I'm sure Gerry came across a few of those, but there are some really, really good people. And like with much people across any sector, not just the prison service, it's about the individual. It's about, it's about, do people feel valued and see an achievement in the work, or are they just wanting to go home at night? Which, yeah, so from a prison officer's point of view, there are lots and lots, and it is changing massively. When I joined the service 15 years ago, there was a lot of ex-military servicemen and women that had come out of one service and joined the other. More recently, there's been a huge push on taking on people from all other walks of life. Myself, I was in sports retail management before I joined the prison service. I was one of sort of the first cohort of people who were coming in from a different background rather than the military background. So the service started to change, and there's still an awful lot of work to be done. But yeah, I agree with what Gerry said. There's some really, really good people. And similarly, on the other side of the fence, when Gerry talked about ex-offenders and stuff like that, there are some really, really good people behind bars who have just made a mistake. We're all one bad decision away from going down a different path, and that's literally all it is. That I met some amazing people, some amazing offenders that I worked with. That I spent a lot of time when you're in prison, when you're working those hours. That I used to say I spent more time at work with some of the prisoners than I did with my family, and you do become not close to them because you've got to maintain that level of professionality. But
yeah,
as Gerry said, you spend a lot of time with people, and it's if you can get along with them. In fact, you find out stuff about people, so you create empathy with them for their circumstances and stuff. So yeah, it's.
I think there was a great TV program. What was it? The chap that. What was his name that was in Game of Thrones that died at the end of the first series? But have a look on it, ITV. There's a great TV series about being locked up, and he was kind of like a first offender of it, and it kind of mirrored my own experiences, not the crime that he committed, but just learning how to use the telephone, learning how to readjust and dealing with certain aspects and all that. I mean, I always remember I get my hair shaved on the wing. And then one of the guys that I got on really well with kind of dragged me into the pad. He fell afterwards and said, do not ever do that again. He says, you need to keep some identity. Do not fall into that trap of thinking you're just a prisoner. And it kind of there was little things like that kind of that kept my head above water. These were the kind of things, these were guys that were looking out for me. These were guys that were doing it. So yeah, you're right. I think, I always acknowledge the good guys that I met in prison. I hate to use that, but I always acknowledge the good officers, because there was some great officers that were there. I get jobs as wing painters and stuff like that. These are all officers that kind of looked at me and went, okay, was that, because the job is ridiculous, the job with inside. But I think, there is culture changing. There's a lot of good people, but there's a lot of good third sector organisations now, which is the difference, which wasn't there when I was there. But there's a massive new there's big organisations, or there's local organisations, and they're who I respect as well, because most of that is lived experience, and it takes some big kahunas for guys and girls to walk back into a prison to say to somebody, look, I can help you to change, because there is a bit of a them in that us culture within it, but that's changing as well, a little bit as well. So I respect everybody across that board. And I think anybody that knows me on Twitter, my interaction is mostly football and Celtic, but I do criminal justice, and I probably get more people from ex-officers and the rehabilitation side. That I don't have that many ex-offenders. I've never kept in touch with that, but I'm very passionate about interacting with people that are very positive about supporting and encouraging them, and trying to have that encouragement talk with them to say that that's brilliant what you're doing, because I think guys and girls that work within the services like that, they need that encouragement as well.
Look, I'm conscious we've only got a few minutes left. We've got questions unanswered in chat. Gerry, I meant to start my talk with you by saying you do not have to say anything unless you wish to do so, but anything you do say might appear on the IEP YouTube channel. So please remember this session will be going up. And Gerry, put you on the spot. Any questions we don't get to today, if we send them across to you and you write us an answer, we can put them in the comments of the YouTube.
Yes, please, that's fine. Yeah, and
right?
you can look for me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty. You just add me and have a chat and stuff like that. There's no drama about that, because I know that potentially there is people that don't want to ask some questions. And remember, as much as we're kind of talking about everything here, my whole background is employability. My whole background is about supporting people, whether it be an organisation to hire more or to keep more people with with that diverse background, to supporting guys and girls that are ex-offenders into work. So because I've done both, I've done both.
That would be brilliant. That actually brings us to a question. Joanna said that unfortunately, depending on the offence, she's experienced difficulty in finding an employer that would hire someone. So there's that barrier, and they've just put barriers up.
I mean, sorry, there you go.
Sorry, yeah, and then we've had another question linked to it around: are there any industries or sectors that tend to be more receptive? So I mean, I'll be honest with you. When I set up Unlock, I took a different approach, and I'm actually looking to do something in the Midlands as well. And I do believe that we need to go back to potentially working more with communities, working more with community-based organisations. And when you work with community-based organisations, you're working with a complete different talent pool. You're working with a diverse talent pool, whether it be ex-offender or cultural backgrounds and the refugee backgrounds. Another massive passion about what I do. And I think there has to be a cultural change within how we do with employment, how we hire, because it is going to have to change, because we can see it. We can see it. There's already, even like the West Midlands just now, the local LEPs and the West Midland Combined Authorities, they're saying all they're getting from their employers is, we need staff, we need people. I hate to say it, there is people out there, the organisations that you're using to hire isn't reaching them, is not reaching to. You're not building in enough maybe risk assessments, or you're not taking a chance, or you're not educating yourself enough to go into communities. And I'm not talking about physically getting into communities, but I'm looking to potentially do something in Birmingham to kind of replicate what we did in Glasgow, and then potentially do what we're doing down here, because employers are struggling, and they're not. And what they're doing is they're struggling when they hire, is that they're struggling to retain. That's the biggest thing that we're finding at the moment as well.
So could I end this webinar with a bit of a message of hope then? From what Gerry's just said, the labour market at the moment, there aren't enough people to go round. So that talent pool that exists within ex-offenders, if that gets tapped into, well, what a difference we could make. And without making it sound like a shameless plug, we deliver disclosure training. And a big point we make in that is that there are very few employers who are not allowed to recruit someone with a criminal record. What the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act says is an employer can turn you down for a job because you've got an unspent conviction. That doesn't mean they have to turn you down.
Yeah.
If the disclosure is powerful enough and balanced with selling your strengths, the jobs Gerry's living proof of.
Yeah, I think what Kevin said, just to reiterate that, is that training is so important. And just because you do one training course, I'm a big believer in that sort of have a look to see what's there. The IP stuff is definitely fantastic, strong training that they deliver. And you'd be surprised at people that have had disclosure training that was 10 years ago, that they don't then go to update it. They don't think about updating it. And that, I think, is, and I go back to the beginning when I say the education and training is important just for ex-offenders as it is for people that work within employment, HR, and advisors as well.
Brilliant. With 1 minute left to go, we'll hand back to you, Helen.
Wow, I don't know whether to go for another question or just do just one last question. So what is the best way we can promote an ex-offender then? If we had to do it in 30 seconds, Gerry, what would you be saying to an employer who wasn't sure?
Speak to them. Make sure that the CV's spot on. That's important. But speak to somebody. That's the biggest thing. I got my chance because I spoke to my employer, and he took a chance on me. I always say to people, look, when you go for a job, no matter what it is, they're hiring you as a person. So you need to sell yourself. So we need to also upskill the ex-offender as well to make sure that the communication skills are good as well. That's important. It's not just
my biggest takeaway from your input today, Gerry, is I'm an ex-offender is just 4 words from someone's entire life story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's take the focus away from the offending and make sure we're plugging the strengths.
Yeah, excellent.
Excellent, wonderful. So we have had lots of comments on how much people have enjoyed it. I haven't got time, Gerry, to read them all to you. Maybe I can send you the Zoom across, the chat notes so you can see it. Any questions that were missed? I know there was one from Shannon that I didn't get to read. We will do what we said and get them across and add them to the chat on the YouTube channel. Thank you so much, Gerry. That's been really interesting.
It's been my pleasure. I've enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you.
Wonderful. No, and it as I say, it's so useful to actually get those 3 points of view as well. So that's been brilliant today. I'm sure we'll be asked at some point to have you back to do something with us again. And that would be wonderful if we could. Thank you everyone for coming today. We will be sharing this via the YouTube channel later on. So if you do have any more questions that you didn't want to pop in the chat or anything you think of after the session, if you get them over to me on an email, I will I'll put them to Gerry and Kev, see what we can come back with. Thank you, everybody. It's been great. Now I'm hoping you have a wonderful rest of the week, although it is a shorter rest of the week. And I look forward to seeing you all again on a future session.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Bye-bye.